We've been watching the sentencing of the three men convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery. The judge called the murder a callous killing. He sentenced Travis McMichael to life in prison with no possibility of parole, and Gregory McMichael to life in prison with no possibility of parole. These were the maximum sentences. He sentenced William Roddie Bryan to life in prison with the possibility of parole. I want to bring in CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassmann, who is outside the courtroom in Brunswick, Georgia, as well as CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, let's begin with you. The prosecutors accused the convicted men of vigilantism before the sentencing. Meanwhile, the defense lawyers argued for a lighter sentence, saying the men deserve a shot at redemption. What did you make of the sentencing?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I thought the judge was incredibly careful and his words were well considered. He didn't say anything that would rile up anybody or create more public sort of upset and uproar over the case, but he did point to several important moments in this trial and pieces of evidence that supported his ultimate sentence. In terms of the arguments that you just mentioned, in terms of the notion of vigilantism, I think that that really went to the prosecutor's notion that these people thought that they were above the law. They presented a defense and continued to do so in sentencing that they were merely trying to protect their neighbors. And this failed as a legal matter before the jury, and I think it failed as well before the judge, because as he said, why do you view your neighbors as simply the people who live a block away from you and not more broadly the public? Why did they have no empathy for this man whom they killed? And, you know, this, I think, was key in terms of the sentencing, was this lack of remorse that he saw, both in terms of the nature of the defense, but also in terms of the words that they said and their actions on that video, that they turned their backs on the dead body of Ahmaud Arbery after having killed him, that somebody who had done this, you know, mistakenly or out of self-defense would not have acted that way. And I think that that was a very powerful point that the judge made and a powerful argument that the prosecution make. Now, I will say about the defense, they did point out the nature of this felony murder charge, which is something that criminal justice reformers have been pointing to in other contexts quite a lot. You can be guilty of murder even if you did not intend to kill anybody, and only if you intended to commit a felony. And that's a harsh charge. And in other contexts, it's been used against people, you know, who are not powerful people. And so the defense tried to build an argument saying that, you know, this is unfair. These, you know, at least Roddie Bryan and Greg McMichael did not necessarily intend to do this, and they committed felony murder, and that is not something that ought to come with this severe sentence. But you know, the judge issued the sentences according to the law and what he thought would be appropriate given the sentencing information and the evidence in the case.
Certainly powerful statements by the judge, who started off talking about all the time that he spent thinking of this, of course, a really difficult case for him to hear, I'm sure. I want to go over to Mark. Mark, you've been outside the courtroom. Members of Ahmaud Arbery's family spoke before the sentencing. What stood out to you?
Well, Nikki, you know, before the sentencing was announced, before the judge described this exercise in accountability, the courtroom and the judge in particular heard, of course, from Ahmaud Arbery's father, his mother, his sister. And here's what came across to me. It's been almost 2 years since Arbery was shot and killed running for his life through that neighborhood. And here we are 23 months later, and what came across from the stand, from the mom, the dad, the sister, was how raw this loss still is to these folks. How the defendants may lose their freedom, but the family is going to lose something that they can never possibly replace. And that really came across. The other thing, the point that they made, clearly pushing for a sentence of life without parole for all three, was the sense that they believe that these defendants have shown no sign of remorse and therefore deserve no possibility of leniency. In 2 of the 3 cases, they got what they wanted. As the mother put it on the stand, they were fully committed to their crimes. They should be fully committed to the consequences of those crimes. And so the rawness of the loss, and the zeal that they have for a full measure of justice for the defendants. I would say, Nikki, the two things that came most strongly across to me.
It was really powerful to hear Ahmaud's parents. There's nothing more unthinkable, of course, than the loss of your child. Mark, what has the impact been in the community in Brunswick, Georgia, from this case?
Well, you see these folks behind me, Nikki. These are mostly supporters of Ahmaud Arbery's family. There's a speaker outside the Glynn County Courthouse, and when the judge announced a life without possibility of parole for each of the first two defendants, big cheer went up. Big cheer went up. And I think in general, there's going to be a sense of relief here. Brunswick did not want to become another Ferguson, another Dateline where a sense of injustice led to upheaval in the community. And clearly, there doesn't seem to be any suggestion that that is now going to happen. I think people here, by and large, are going to be relieved at both the verdicts and at the sentences. And you recall, too, Nikki, how hard it was in this community just to seat the jury. It took almost 3 weeks to seat this jury, small community, lots of publicity in this case. And when they finally did seat the jury, it was 11 white jurors and 1 black juror. And that, in the eyes of many people, could have been problematic. In the end, the verdicts that they delivered almost have an enhanced credibility in the eyes of a lot of people here. That is, 11 white jurors and 1 black juror all agreed this was wrong, this was murder, these defendants deserve to pay. Nikki?
Also notice the judge said this is a case of note. Certainly the country has been watching this case for the past 2 years, all eyes on the trial, waiting for the sentencing. Today, I'm glad to see a sense of peace behind you there, Mark. Thank you. Rebecca, I want to come back to you. And the judge touched on this a little bit during his final statements. Do the convicted have any recourse at this point? And what are your overall takeaways from this case?
Yes, so there will undoubtedly be an appeal. There are legal questions that were determined. There were some evidentiary questions, and those can all be the basis for appeal. In following this case, I didn't see anything that immediately jumped out at me that seemed like it would warrant reversal. So my guess is that those appeals will not be successful, but the defense absolutely has a right to pursue them and most likely will. Of course, there are also those federal charges that remain, the hate crime charges under the federal laws, and the defendants will have to proceed on those charges as well. So their legal drama is not over, even though this case itself is over, and their fate has really been determined at this point, I think, barring some unexpected surprise that might come up. But otherwise, it seems like those appeals will happen, but will likely be unsuccessful. And, you know, in terms of my take on this case, it to me, one of the takeaways, I mentioned before, the one that the judge mentioned, which was about the importance of empathy for more than the people just in your neighborhood. But, to me, there's a legal moral of the story, which is that that courtrooms and legal procedure really do still work, and that there is a reason to respect that process and allow it to proceed as it goes. This was a case with so much emotion, understandably, and people were so eager to see, certain conclusions and certain consequences, but allowing courtrooms to proceed as they do, sometimes to disappointment and sometimes not, is the way that this country works. And I think that this is another example of, even in these charged times, even in the case in which, such important issues are being, in some ways on trial as well, question of racism in our country, all of those were being kind of thrown onto this case and this trial. To me, the criminal law is not particularly well positioned to answer those larger questions, but it does do a good job in these particular circumstances of looking at the facts and applying the law. And so I think, to me, that's an important moral of the story as well.
And on this sentencing day, let us take a moment to remember Ahmaud Arbery. Mark Strassmann and Rebecca Roiphe, thank you.